thank you everybody for joining us today on this rescheduled Iacocca Institute Executive Leadership Dialogue. It's a pleasure to welcome you all and thank you for being here. The dialogues over this year have really spanned a range of leadership fields. We've heard about emerging uses and challenges of AI in leadership and in strategy. We've heard about alternative health systems around the world. We've heard about strategic developments in human resource management and alternative nonprofit valuation systems. Next month, we're going to hear about aviation, actually in just a couple of weeks. But today, our focus is on the global system of the United Nations, and we hear from our colleague, Kevin Cassidy. Kevin is, I think, recently retired from a long career with the United Nations. He served as the director and representative to the Bretton Woods and multilateral organizations for the International Labor Organization, a key U.S. agency in the United States and Canada. And in this capacity, Kevin led high-level policy discussions with government officials, legislators, international financial institutions on issues relating to global labor standards and social justice. He's presently a consultant to the World Bank, analyzing complex development projects using an interdisciplinary perspective to help governments advance more effective approaches to resolving difficult economic and social challenges. We're going to hear from Kevin about the United Nations and its transitions, but he's also shared some other subjects on which he's equally well informed, and he presented to the Global Village students material on another current leadership concern of his that I'm sure he'll mention, next-gen skilling, with an agile skilling and experiential learning framework. So I welcome Kevin and turn it over to you. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, everyone, and really excited to be speaking with you today and really have enjoyed the last several speakers on this series. The United Nations is marking its 80th anniversary, and it faces a profound crisis of confidence, which is largely hamstrung by a crippling liquidity shortfall. And although less apparent to many observers, the institution frequently faces obstacles to decisive and necessary action due to the influence and position of its most powerful members. So the first point is to say that the institutions of the UN system are actually run by and decided by the member states themselves. If we can go to the next slide, please. The concerns that are voiced by the 193 member states are largely focused on the institution's ability to address global challenges due to geopolitical gridlock, pervasive inefficiency, and a growing legitimacy gap, particularly in the Security Council. For many followers and insiders of the UN, they attribute this to the perceived ineffectiveness of factors such as the member states' reluctance to compromise, inconsistent fulfillment of responsibilities, organizational rivalries within the UN itself, selective compliance with regulations, and at times the withholding of members' dues when recommended actions by the institutions are deemed politically inconvenient. Such practices do corrode the bedrock of the international order and the consensus that is painstakingly built over decades. Yet the gravest threat to the United Nations is not this procedural death, but also the collapse of the conviction amongst its members. And I think that's the point number two, is that we're at this rather interesting juncture in time where the international system is being called into question. So if the principles that were originally brought the nations together are forsaken, then the ambitious institutional reforms that are being put forward will not work. The authority and the imperative to make the organization effective rests not with the bureaucracy, but it is with the member states themselves, which direct every action of these institutions. Few of these concerns are new. I mean, they have resulted from a slow crisis of confidence aggravated by decades of inaction. And some of the most glaring examples of this self-inflicted decline are the return of great power competition in the Security Council, which often paralyzes action by vetoes. The 1994 Rwanda genocide, which claimed almost 1 million lives, was a catastrophic failure of international political will, where UN peacekeepers were rendered powerless to protect the civilians. the post 9/11 war on terror and the 2003 invasion of Iraq, which happened without a clear Security Council mandate, had dealt a very severe blow to the UN's credibility and the very idea of collective security. In 2011, the NATO-led intervention in Liberia was authorized to protect civilians, but had devolved into a campaign of regime change, and this was seen by other countries as a pretext for Western interventionism. And of course, the current global wave of populism and nationalism is openly forcing the question of the value of international institutions. And this has led to the erosion of confidence in the liberal multilateral order, leaving the UN on the defensive. So the UN is being forced to rethink its purpose. Its challenge is no longer one of an ambitious expansion, but a defensive struggle to preserve a fraying multilateral system. This irony was underscored by Secretary General Guterres, who marked the start of the anniversary not with a celebration, but a stark warning of new and growing threats. In his speech, the General Assembly, Guterres had cautioned that the world had opened up a modern-day Pandora's box of threats. These are the very dangers that the UN was designed to contain, but now seem powerless to confront. These challenges, and if we can go to, yes, the next one, the cascade of runaway conflicts that are fueled by geopolitical division, unchecked climate change, which is quickly making parts of our planet unlivable, rampant inequalities, which is eroding the social cohesion and trust, and the rapid rise of artificial intelligence, which demands urgent global governance. In addition to these emerging threats, the UN has identified an expanding portfolio of mandates which are exacerbating the systemic inefficiencies and further straining underfunded efforts. In March of this year, Secretary General had introduced the UN80 Initiative in conjunction with the anniversary, and the aim is to restructure the organization with an emphasis on efficiency, operational focus, and increased support from the member states. So this primary objective to enhance integration with the organization also looks at issues of the redundancies and internal competition. Next slide, please. I wanted to show the organizational chart of the UN. I don't know how many people have actually looked at it, but from an operational standpoint, this is less a simple chart and more a representation of a multifaceted political ecosystem. These intricate network of institutions can be conceptualized in three distinct entities operating under one unified mandate. The first of the three is the fortress. That is the Security Council. This is an exclusive club where 5 nations hold a veto, and its primary function is not global action, but preventing great power conflict through what we term controlled paralysis. It writes the rules of war and peace, but outsources the consequences. Secondly, we have the network. This is the vast decentralized web of humanitarian development agencies like the World Health Organization, like the International Labor Organization, like the World Food Program. And their power comes not from the political mandates, but the leveraging of their expertise to meet the challenges of global crises. So this is the UN at work on the ground, helping people everywhere. It's what we see on the news, and it's what people will see if they're out in the field in these countries where the UN is operational. And then thirdly, you have the pulpit. And this is the General Assembly and human rights bodies. So these entities have no army, they have no treasury, and their only currency is actually moral authority. So they wield the power to define what is right, even when they have no power to enforce it. To enforce it is the domain of the Security Council. So the UN's daily reality is a collision of all these three worlds: the fortress that dictates what is possible, the pulpit that argues what is necessary morally, and the network which is left to manage the gap in between the two. The next slide, please. The UN General Assembly, which has just started actually on Wednesday, the 9th of September, or was that Tuesday, should be seen as a pivotal crisis summit. It's addressing numerous global challenges and striving to enhance the effectiveness, efficiency, and innovation of a system to meet these challenges. There are 180 separate agenda points on the UN General Assembly's agenda this year. You can see the 15 pages of the agenda itself. I have just extracted a couple of points of these issues to show you the scope and scale of what the UN really deals with. I'm going to, put these under 3 massive categories. So the first one is geopolitical crises. This includes the ongoing war in Ukraine, and which obviously highlights the complex challenges of global security, territorial integrity, international law. It's also the strategic competition between the United States, China, Russia, and frequently affects Security Council decisions. The second category is the planetary and economic crises. For many developing nations, they're experiencing significant debt. They are debt distressed, as the World Bank will call them, and they require trillions of dollars in financing to help them get out of this debt. Also, you have the effects of climate change. So we've seen record heat waves, floods, and storms, and this has shifted the discussion towards immediate action on emissions and providing funding for climate adaptation and addressing loss and damage. The third mega area is the crisis of trust. So everything is underpinned by the profound crisis in faith in global cooperation and widespread frustration that the international system is unfair because of the composition, say, of the Security Council, or at its core that it's anachronistic or it's paralyzed. And this has fueled an intense debate in the UN and will be the unofficial backdrop of the start of the race to select the next Secretary General. So while all of this is going on, the process to select a new leader of the UN and what kind of leadership the world needs is actually just starting this year. The impact of the General Assembly is rarely felt in a sort of single dramatic breakthrough. It's about setting the course for the year and sending a powerful signal about the state of global cooperation. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the multilateral system before we get into the UN80 Initiative. I'm not sure how much people really know about the UN. Bill, I'm sure you know as much as anyone in the UN itself. But let's look at a broad sweep of the UN, the US's relationship with the UN, its hand in its creation, the size and scope of activities, as well as what does it mean to be the top contributor to the UN. So as many may know, the UN system was established by its charter, signed in San Francisco Opera House in 1945, and headquartered in New York since 1950. Its operations have been supported by a system of international monetary management, as well as developing financing through the World Bank, which came into being at negotiations in Bretton Woods in New Hampshire in 1944. The UN system has a vast spectrum of issues, as you've seen under the agenda, but the 5 core pillars are maintaining peace and security, protecting human rights, delivering humanitarian aid, promoting sustainable development, and developing and upholding international law. So the UN system is comprised of 6 main bodies, 43 independent agencies, funds, and programs, 193 member states. When it was first signed, there were only 51 member states. It functions with approximately 131,000 staff in 1,100 offices worldwide. And each year, the UN collaborates globally with tens of thousands of development partners to help on these development projects that improve lives and livelihoods. The UN system has a 2-tiered funding structure, and this is a major contention at this time as well. We have both assessed contributions and voluntary contributions. So the regular budget assessed contributions, what you see, the 9.7 billion, is both for the UN system and peacekeeping. Peacekeeping is double the UN. So all the institutions that you've seen, minus the peacekeeping operations, is the core work is done with 3.6 billion. I think those business people here today will see that 3.6 billion is not a very large institution. The US pays about 22%, which is 720 million. In terms of voluntary contributions, that's 61.5 billion. This supports, additional work, but also earmarked. So this is the key challenge that we have, that the UN is heavily dependent on donor-directed funding, with earmarked contributions accounting for over 87% of all voluntary funds. The US provides 11 billion of that. Earmarking allows a small group of donors to dictate how and on what the UN can spend this funding on, and it shifts that administrative power and political power to this group. Hence why some of the developing countries are calling for change. Additionally, some of the richest countries are currently reducing development aid, they're boosting defense budgets, and gearing up for heightened competition. So while the UN can highlight these shifts, they are not in a position to change them. This is a member state-driven set of institutions. But ever since its inception, the UN has been the cornerstone of the post-World War II multilateral order and a critical partner for the US foreign policy. So in terms of US benefits, so the US sees the UN as a force multiplier for its diplomatic, security, and economic goals. This allows Washington to address global challenges very cost effectively and also to shape the international system in its vision. So on this, there are four elements. The first benefit is that the UN peacekeeping missions are authorized by the US, and they are 8 times less expensive for American taxpayers rather than deploying US forces. This comes out of the Gao report in the US. The US also leverages this leadership to pass and enforce robust international sanctions against rogue states and terrorist groups, and it's a critical component of US national security. But beyond conflicts, UN agencies collaborate with US law enforcement to combat things like transnational threats and the flow of illicit drugs. The second return on this investment is the direct economic return. So the US hosts the UN headquarters in New York, and the presence of the UN in New York injects over 3.6 billion every year into the local economy. Right now, there'll be tens of thousands of people going to the UN for the General Assembly, which takes place every year in September. This is one of the big pushes, and of course, you can imagine that that injects a lot of cash into the businesses in New York. Also, U.S. companies consistently win more UN procurement contracts than any other nation, securing 2.4 billion each year, which also supports American jobs. Thirdly, U.S. foreign aid creates future markets by fostering economic growth and building a strong middle class in recipient nations. These programs that the UN empowers is developing purchasing power for goods and services, especially from the U.S. For example, South Korea and Brazil over the years has become a major trading partner of the U.S. U.S. engagement also creates immediate demand for goods and services in the sectors of agriculture. For example, the World Food Program buys a lot of produce from the U.S. farmers, also from the pharmaceutical and medical equipment, transportation, engineering, and ICT. And lastly, the U.S. health representatives have immense influence in setting technical standards that govern these global industries. So through the International Telecommunication Union, they set the geostationary orbits of satellites. The International Civil Aviation Organization, which looks at all the major airlines and the rules that govern that. The International Labor Organization, my former organization, which looks at a number of issues, particularly on human trafficking, child labor, forced labor. The International Migration Organization, looking at migration issues, the Food and Agricultural Organization, the World Health Organization, and the World Intellectual Property Organization. So U.S. leadership in these bodies ensures that American innovation and technology are embedded in this global marketplace, which will subsequently benefit U.S. corporations and maintaining their competitive edge. The next slide, please. So, as mentioned at the start, Secretary General Guterres had launched the UN80 Initiative to address donors' concerns. And this is a system-wide effort to translate the visionary principles of the SG's 2001 report on our common future, which is further guided by the specific commitments of the 2024 member state-led process, which is called the Pact for the Future. The intention is for the UN system that this framing will be a practical engine for building a more effective and relevant institution. Our common agenda sets out proposals for renewing what's called the social contract, increasing global solidarity, and adjusting aspects of global governance. This initiative is designed to supplement existing agreements by addressing issues such as climate change, inequality, and digital access. The pact is a culmination of an intensive intergovernmental negotiation process which seeks to forge new international consensus both for the present and the future. It's designed to accelerate achievement on the Sustainable Development Goals and to strengthen global governance in an era of transition and interconnected crises. At its core, the UN80 Initiative uses 3 main work streams to implement the Pact's ambitious roadmap. This process directly answers our common agenda's call for a more networked and inclusive multilateralism. So we're going to go through the streams now, and if I can ask for the next slide on stream 1, please. So the first stream focuses on the immediate and practical measures to streamline operations, reduce costs, and enhance service delivery under the UN's current structure. The output for this stream, the primary output is a revised estimate of the 2026 program budget, and that will be developed over the course of this year and the beginning of next. And it's a very obviously anticipated document because it's going to translate the initiative's goals into concrete budgetary and administrative actions. And it will be presented to the General Assembly next year to this current General Assembly for consideration. There's also a dedicated working group for the Secretariat, and it has the unfortunate task of developing specific proposals that are being implemented right now. That includes the reduction of posts at the UN by 20%. Many people I've talked to are talking about 30 to 35% of staff being let go. Also, relocating services and staff from high-cost duty stations like New York or Geneva to lower-cost locations. I just got off the phone with Geneva, and they were talking about the same thing in Geneva, where people will be moved to Budapest or to Bangkok or to a number of other countries. And the people who will be moved and retain their jobs are the senior officials, but the people who are the operational people on the ground, the general service, it's the old British civil service system, the general service will all lose their jobs. They do not have their rights in order to move their job from Geneva to Bangkok or to Côte d'Ivoire or to wherever else they may be going. Also, they'll be looking at centralizing IT and support services and eliminating redundancies. So this is a highly contentious issue. And at the end of the day, it's about people. It's about people's lives. If you have a family, you're living in Geneva, the kids are going to school, you own a house, you have to, if you lose your job, you'll have to sell your house. You'll have to move your kids. I mean, this is really seriously upsetting a institution that has developed the expertise embedded within the staff itself that is now going to go away. It's a very difficult time. The next stream, please. The mandate implementation review has just been completed, and the findings show that the UN's ineffectiveness is undermined by what they call mandate overload. This is an excessive demand on exceeding the available resources and time. This frequent duplication of wasted funds due to competing mandates at UN bodies also result in heavy reporting detracting from the field work where the actual work is taking place. A major issue identified also is the lack of expiration dates for most mandates. So this allows outdated activities to persist and blocking resource allocation to urgent priorities. Also, chronic underfunding has worsened this problem, and member states often assign new tasks without additional funding. Their favorite term in developing UN resolutions is to say, quote unquote, within existing resources. To address these challenges, the report recommends certain reforms, such as creating a digital registry for mandates, using AI tools for clearer resolutions, requiring that all new tasks be funded to proceed, and making sunset clauses for the mandatory new resolutions, ensuring regular review and justification for ongoing activities. As I mentioned, ultimately, the implementation depends on the member states' willingness to commit to change and to overhaul their longstanding organizational practices. The third stream, please. This is the most ambitious and the long-term work stream. It's exploring fundamental changes to the structure of the UN. You had seen that rather complicated map, that ecosystem, political ecosystem, which had dozens and dozens of organizations and entities. And we're looking at obviously consolidating the functions. The definitive report on this stream is forthcoming. It's expected next year, and the direction it'll take has been leaked in several ways. So, for example, during the summer, there was an internal memo which has put forward some radical proposals. The first one was the creation of a single humanitarian mega agency, which is merging the operations and responsibilities of the World Food Program, of UNICEF, and of the World Health Organization into a single entity. They're also talking about having a humanitarians operation department by taking the Office of the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs. I worked there once before, and one of the operations that OCHA looks at is demining, where I was very active. Also, the World Food Program and the UN's Relief Works Agency will be integrated, or the thoughts are that it'll be integrated. There's also the consolidation of peace and security functions, and this mentions the Department of Political Affairs and the Department of Peacekeeping Operations merged into a single department. It also consolidates the various envoys and special advisors to eliminate overlaps. They're also looking at major mergers in health and gender equity. So this strategic integration is taking the UN AIDS operation and bringing it into WHO, which has now been seriously underfunded. They're also looking at merging UN Women into the UN Fund for Population Activities to form a new powerful entity on gender equality and reproductive health, and also streamlining human rights mechanisms and, as I mentioned, cost-cutting relocations. There are other processes in play. The structural reform is advancing through 7 high-level clusters, looking at the priorities of the UN. And there's also a review of the field presence, which is to consolidate the structure of regional offices, special representatives, and envoys to create a more streamlined and cost-effective system. The findings from the first 2 work streams are intended to directly inform this broader structural transformation. But while member states are broadly supportive of this restructuring, as you can imagine, different countries, different groupings have different views of what they want to see. For example, the US is a key proponent of the cost-cutting exercise and the return to core peace and security functions. Europeans worry that the reforms could sideline priorities like human rights and climate action. China and the G7, a grouping of developing countries, are worried that this may be a pretext to avoid financial obligations by major contributors. And of course, they stress the importance of UN development pillar. And then the African group, the C10 and the L69 group, are concerned about the lack of progress in Security Council, where no African country is a part of the permanent 5 members. And they have reforms which are looking at expanding the number of seats, limiting the use of the veto, which is causing a lot of consternation amongst the UN itself, and improving the accountability. If we can go to the next slide, please. So what are the next steps? So the UN session, which has just started, as I mentioned, on the 9th of September, is going to be a crucial test of the budget negotiations among the 193 member states. So the General Assembly this year will look at these practical proposals to streamline the bureaucracy and to gain the necessary political and financial backing, or will it be watered down by national interests and financial constraints? So the UN Secretariat has formally submits its revised budget for the 2026 program in mid-September to the GA. And this document, as I mentioned, will be the first tangible translation of the initiative's work and improving efficiency into an actionable and budgeted work plan. The General Assembly debate on the 23rd to the 29th of September. This is when world leaders are there, and particularly major financial contributors will be watched closely for signs of support or opposition to the specific cuts. The most important battles will take place in the 5th committee. The General Assembly, once the high-level week is over, breaks into 6 committees. The 5th committee, which oversees administrative and budgetary matters, will have to negotiate these outcomes and see if the proposed efficiency measures and budget cuts and staff reductions are ultimately approved. So this fall's budget will set the stage for the most ambitious part, which is the potential merger of large UN agencies. That's Stream 3. And that will take place over 2026 and 2027. So whether the ambitious vision of the UN will succeed or fail will be decided during this General Assembly. These upcoming negotiations will see if the member states share the Secretary General's desire for a nimble institution, or will it die a quiet death in the committee discussions. For the UN staff, and I was just speaking to my colleagues at the Secretariat last night, there's a plummeting morale. This is tied to a suspicion that UN80 Initiative will only be a cost-cutting exercise and serve as a cover for significant layoffs and the downgrading of post levels. The prevailing fear is that these cuts will fail to address the organization's persistent challenges and in some instances exacerbate them. So there's a great deal of nervousness also about funding, that if the funding is not forthcoming, and currently member states owe 3.8 billion in arrears. This is a 1-year budget for the UN. And unfortunately, the US owes 3.1 billion of the 3.8 billion outstanding. But if a member state unilaterally cuts its funding or rescinds its membership, there will be a power vacuum. The Chinese government, for example, has increased its donations to the UN, and as we have seen in the past, that when your donations are increased, member states demand more power in decision making, more senior posts, so they can assure that their agenda is preeminent. So this power vacuum is something that really is lurking in the background. So amid this crisis and the deep-seated questions about the UN's relevance, as I mentioned, the institution is embarking on the selection of a new Secretary General, although through a deeply fractured era. So Guterres, the Secretary General currently, his term ends in December of 2026, and the horse trading in the corridors of the UN will start taking place. And this will be interesting to see a sort of a fundamental clash between the diplomatic traditions and the stark realities. So, for example, one of the longstanding precedents is that the Secretary General's post is rotating geographically. This time it's meant to go to a Latin American. Javier Perez de Cuellar from Peru was the last Secretary General from the region. And this is also followed by a vigorous campaign to have a first female leader of the institution. They've all been men before. But these desires are running into the power of the permanent 5 members of the Security Council. So also, despite the sort of transparent measures like public forums with candidates, and the final decision, unfortunately, be made by a secret straw poll, where a single veto from the United States or Russia or China or the UK or France can end a candidacy. So the process, diplomats will concede, is not that it produces the most dynamic leader, but it at least selects the least objectionable one to all sides. And according to senior diplomats and officials tracking these early discussions, there are 2 leading contenders. Some of them are yet to announce, and there will be dozens who will want to be Secretary General. The 2 distinct front runners at the moment is Rebecca Greenspan of Costa Rica, and she heads the UN's Trade and Development Agency, which is seen by many states as the embodiment of what they're looking for. It's a former vice president with deep experience in the UN, and her candidacy would satisfy those dual calls for a woman and someone from the region. The second one, which I was just informed about this week, was Rafael Grossi from Argentina. He is the director of the International Atomic Energy Agency, and he has formally announced his bid this week in Washington. He positions himself as a crisis-tested manager who has gained a high profile for hands-on diplomacy in places like Ukraine. So the choice is between a seasoned development expert like Ms. Greenspan, or a high-voltage crisis manager like Mr. Grossi, or even a non-traditional yet undeclared candidate. But we will see the signals from the World Power Brokers during this General Assembly. If I can have the last slide, please. So the UN is an imperfect network, but it does reflect the political world around us. And notwithstanding those concerns, the UN has shown itself for 8 decades to be an indispensable partner for international growth and cooperation. I was honored to be part of it for 40 years. The criticisms that the UN faces today raises questions about its missions and effectiveness. And this is also converged with a torrent of global threats, severe financial shortage, and it's creating an existential moment for the UN. The UN80 Initiative serves as I believe, a pragmatic recognition of the existing limitations, and it hopes to outline a comprehensive plan for reform. It seeks to adapt the organization to the complexities of the moment, as well as future global challenges. The United Nations, at the end of the game here, is meant to enhance its agility, its coherence, and its overall effectiveness. But moving forward, the discussions and challenges will be politically challenging. The UN reform depends on cooperation between the system and the member states. Member states who ultimately control those mandates need to replace these mandates. Some of them are very wedded to some of those mandates. They need to properly fund new ones, which is very difficult to get the governments to give more money, and to support a streamlined structure. And many of these institutions are located in capitals around the world. So as you can imagine, just saying we'd like to integrate it and make it more efficient is not necessarily something politically that may fly. So in closing, I wanted to refer to Secretary General Guterres's Pandora's box statement that he made at the General Assembly this start of the year. Guterres had concluded his speech by saying that after all the evils that had escaped Pandora's box, only hope remained. So he is encouraging the delegates never to lose sight of hope, to emphasize that hope is achieved through action and adhering to principles and speaking the truth. So we are at a rather interesting moment for the UN, and I thank you very much for your time and being able to speak with you today about this issue. Thank you.